This is Henry Chamberlain. I'm speaking with Ted Rall, and you can find him on Twitter at Ted Rall and also on his website, rall.com. He's a political cartoonist, a columnist, graphic novelist. We're going to be talking about The Stringer, which is a political thriller and which is just in my wheelhouse because I love politics and I love great storytelling. Thank you so much, Ted, for doing this.
Thanks for having me, Henry. I'm very excited.
And I have some visual aids they're actually excellent memory prompts for me in case I get lost in my conversation. But I was thinking, what can I ask him that's clever and maybe a little different? And I was thinking about the fact that I was struck by the introduction and you talking about being a war correspondent. And I thought, yeah, I guess I definitely remember because I'm just a casual reader. I forgot, but I looked back, oh my God, yeah, very impressive stuff. You've been to Afghanistan a number of times. Can you talk about how that informed The Stringer, just as a jumping off point?
Yeah, the cliche in writing class is write what you know. I always wonder about someone like Isaac Asimov, how they were able to write things how he was able to, write things that he apparently could not have known. I'd love to have asked him about that. But there's a lot of stuff in The Stringer that's autobiographical, not all by any means, and certainly I haven't engaged in any of the nefarious dealings of my anti-hero protagonist. But particularly the sense that war correspondents in particular, but all journalists who work in dangerous beats feel and are really and have been feeling underappreciated for a long time. I mean, I remember one time when I went to Afghanistan in 2001, and one of the newspapers I was working for was the Village Voice. And I asked sort of casually when I was halfway there, one of my editors, so what happens if I get injured? And will you send a medevac? And he said, no medevac. And so that made its way into the book because I thought, wow, you're really, if something happens to me there, my body might not even come home, and so that's a sense that, it makes for cynicism and a sense of feeling unappreciated. And I was thinking, and that was the part that I kind of put into my character, Mark Scribner, that it's kind of like, in the real world, there's a bell curve of, very negative experiences to very positive ones, and most are sort of in between. But I wanted to sort of examine what would happen to a character who had really a lot of bad breaks, and what would happen if he really sort of went bad. And I remember I was sitting. The inspiration for this book really came at a place called the Gandamak Lodge, which is or I don't know if it's still around, it might be. It was in Kabul. It's a guest house that is heavily fortified. It's in downtown Kabul on Embassy Row. And it's basically the place for war reporters, NGO workers, foreign contractors, mercenaries, to CIA people, embassy staff, to hobnob, grab a beer, pick each other up, hang out, just stay, whatever. And it's it's like a little oasis in the middle of Kabul. I mean, Afghanistan's a dry country. You're not allowed to drink, certainly, but all sorts of promiscuity goes on there. It used to belong to Osama bin Laden, which is very strange. It's owned by this British former war correspondent. And anyway, I was watching everybody sort of, NGO workers hang out with, getting picked up by mercenaries. And I was like, this is so weird and strange. And I thought, there's so much intersectionality, and I don't mean in the political sense, but more like in the Malcolm Gladwell connector sense, between all these people who kind of collide together. That's a witch's brew that someone could really take advantage of. I thought, I personally know people who can have other people killed just for money. And why do I know that? Because I'm a journalist, and every journalist who goes over there does. So I thought, journalists are kind of like, they're dangerous potentially. And if you don't want to piss off people who are dangerous, I kind of allude to that In the book, I talk about the former Soviet scientists who, had incredible knowledge of nuclear weapons, and how it was kind of a bad idea to not cashier them and send them into a cozy retirement, because what if, some terrorist group were to hire them, right? So, or a rogue state. So so I would say that probably about roughly a quarter of the plot line, either directly or indirectly, comes out of something that I either personally observed or was one step removed from, in terms of in terms of my war reporting experience.
I have a dozen things running in my head to ask you. I'm going to head over here to the visuals that'll help get us going. And these are the NBM titles, your publisher's NBM for the stringer. There's Afghanistan and Back, which a lot of folks will remember as your first foray, or I don't know foray, what would be the right term, just your first reporting in Afghanistan. The Year of Loving Dangerously, which is very important to the stringer, since that's your creative partner, Pablo Caello. I hope I'm pronouncing that right, Caello?
Yeah, Galejo, yeah.
And well, he did The Bluesman. And then there's the Silk Road to Ruin, 2024, another graphic novel of yours. And then this book here, which is a different publisher, After We Kill You, We Will Welcome You Back as Honored Guests, which ties in with what's informing the stringer. And there's just a little sample for folks. I love maps because it helps get a person situated, because the old joke is people don't even know where this country is on a globe. And it's so true, it's painful to think about, but there's Afghanistan, Pakistan's right next door, India, and in other countries which people have never heard of, Turkmenistan, Iran, of course. I don't know what thoughts might be bubbling in your head about this. I just think about how uninformed folks are, and on some very basic levels, which is, I think, inexcusable, really.
It is inexcusable. I think it would be completely excusable for the citizens of the island nation of Vanuatu not to have much awareness of the rest of the world, because they're not really trying to spread Vanuatuan culture and economics and military power everywhere. But the US is, right? I mean, we are the new British Empire. The sun never sets on the American empire. No country has ever controlled every single sea as we do. The Brits even didn't have the kind of dominance that we do. So we want to run the world. We are certainly running a big part of the world. And it's kind of your obligation, if you're running a big business, to know something about it. But we really kind of don't know anything at all.
Which brings in a lot of things. I'm just going to come back here. The main point, one of the biggest takeaways, maybe the biggest takeaway, is how the US reneged and betrayed and just effed up Afghanistan. There was no Marshall Plan, which we could have done, some kind of Marshall Plan, something, because there was an Uber driver from Afghanistan, and he was telling me very matter-of-factly, well, nothing gets done. We can't even expect a street to get completed. It's all corrupt. He was like,
He's right.
Resigned to that. And we could still do it, but now it's too late. I mean,
We should leave.
We should just leave at this point. But God,
we should have never gone in the first place. But
yeah.
once we did, I mean, it's true that the Afghan people really did want a lot of infrastructure. It's not like there's nothing. Okay, I mean, certainly the difference between my trip in 2001 and my trip in 2010 is significant, particularly in the cities. I mean, there's paved roads. That's not a small thing. There's electrification, part of the day. That didn't used to be the case. Some places now have running water and internet. Again, that bridges have been restored, but the countryside is unchanged completely. The big parts of the country are unchanged. And of course, the security system is atrocious. I mean, the security situation is non-existent. But as your driver said, yeah, it's the corruption that's really seriously out of control. And that's our fault, because we didn't let the Afghan people choose their own leaders. We didn't let them work it out. We installed Hamid Karzai, our little puppet, our little Marshal Pétain. And he himself personally wasn't particularly corrupt, but his family and the people around him were filthy.
Hmm. Well, I jump over here to the Year of Loving Dangerously because of your creative partner, Pablo. And here's a sample of the work in that book, which is just spot on for the narrative. But his work has shifted over to a more minimal spare style, which is really neat for the stringer. And here's the whole cover of the book. There's a blog post, folks, if they want some inside information on the process on NBM's blog, where Pablo talks about all the cars that were used, all the references he had, all the.
It's funny, this is an early version because look, which is still misspelled.
Oh,
that was fixed. It better have been fixed in the final. No, I know it was. I've seen
yeah.
it.
Well, he said he used the Land Rover because the Land Rover was just so much more dynamic than a Toyota Land Cruiser, which would have been more accurate.
True, true.
But here's some samples from the stringer, and this is early on in the book, some scenes from Mark Scribner's childhood. As
the black and white scenes are all flashbacks.
As a newspaper guy, as the stringer, which is it's a wonderful motif running throughout the book. Would you like to talk about that?
Well, sure, yeah. So a stringer is just like this scene says. A stringer is like basically a very low-level reporter, typically entry-level, young. Back in the day, it could even be like a kid, like a 17-year-old. And anyway, it's a person who just, the reporter doesn't necessarily go to the scene. They write this. They sit in the office, and wait, because they needed, back in the old days, they couldn't file from the field, right? They couldn't like write it up on their phone and send it in. They needed to be at their desk typing so that the piece could be typeset in time for typically a 5 o'clock deadline. So they would end up, so someone would go to the story, talk to witnesses, get some quotes, call them into the reporter, and the reporter would weave them into the story. That's what a stringer is. And I thought, obviously there's a double entendre here, which is, Mark Scribner, our lead character here, gets quite strung out.
And then he's here, as a nice close-up of him, where he still believes in journalism, but we're getting to the point where he's thinking maybe I got to look out for number one.
Yeah, yeah. It's a noir. The stringer is a noir. In every sense of the word, except there's no femme fatale. Well, actually, there kind of is, but that comes up if there's in the sequel, if there's going to be one.
Oh, there should be. And here's
it's already all. It depends on how the sales of this go. I mean, the plot's already written and everything.
And here's two generations getting together: the boomer and millennial.
Yep. Yeah, I thought that was important. I also thought it was important for there to be a platonic relationship between an older man and a younger woman, because one of the things that always bothers me in films and in novels is that, inevitably the charming older man, sort of piggishly seduces the younger woman. And I'm 57. I have friends who are half my age, and they're just friends, and they're really near and dear and valuable to me. And it's kind of like those relationships are all over the place. And so like, why not have them be wholesome and mutually beneficial and non-sexual?
Yeah. And then here is getting into the plot, his discovering this app or ways to manipulate emails. Did you want to speak a little bit? Is spoof card real? I didn't get a chance to look that up.
Yeah. When you go through, one of the things you'll find about the stringer is I didn't do one of the things, sort of the typical trope of like fake country names, fake president names, fake company names. These figures are real. And like, that the spoof card is a real service. that you can, so you can use your phone to send a text message. Like I can send a text message that looks like it came from your phone. And there's kind of like no way for anyone to find out that's not true, except for you maybe to insist that it's not true. Good luck.
Well, I wonder how successful that is with younger people. You would think that they would, well, I don't know. I guess anybody's susceptible, human nature being what it is.
Well, it just depends. I mean, the thing is, yeah, I mean, it depends on how gullible you are, but it depends on how clever the perp is.
Well, without giving too much away, I don't think this is kind of like a nice teaser, is the fact that Mark is like, hey, it's time to look out for number one. So he finds a way to manipulate world events and to his enrichment. And things just go crazy from there. So
yeah,
I look at this.
He figures out how to make, the one thing you're not supposed to do is make the news. They say you're not supposed to be part of the story. Well, that's certainly true. You're certainly not supposed to make the story. I always think famously of the exception of William Randolph Hearst had a reporter stationed in Havana before the beginning of the Spanish-American War, and nothing was happening. Eventually, for those who remember history, the USS Maine blew up in Havana Harbor. We know that it was just the boiler just blew up. It was just an accident. But the US blamed Spain. It went to war, and then ultimately that's how we ended up getting Puerto Rico and Guam and Guantanamo Bay and all that. We invaded Cuba as a result. Anyway, the point is that it sort of started American empire. But Hearst had his reporter sort of hanging out drinking mojitos in Havana, nothing going on, and the guy telegraphed Hearst and said, hey, there's nothing going on. Do you want me to come back? I feel badly about spending your money. And he said, and Hearst replied, you sit still, I'll supply the war. So,
Well, the tiniest things, relatively tiny things, can still start wars, like the Gulf of Tonkin incident.
Which didn't happen, by the way.
And it still rings in my ear, George Bush saying Iranian yellow cake.
Right, which also didn't happen.
Yes, exactly.
A lot of inciting incidents in wars did not actually happen.
And here's where Mark is now in full swing. His scheme is definitely working, which is great. Great for him, great for the story, I mean. And I like this reference here you make to, it's a wonderful way to include some interesting gateways people can take, a winner-take-all society. I'm kind of curious now to read that.
It's a great book. It'll help you. I mean, everyone should read it if they want to kind of know why things are the way they are in so many ways. I mean, like why wealth is aggregating into fewer and fewer hands. There's just very, very few winners and a lot of losers, and increasingly just the way things are moving. I mean, when I was a little kid, if you were like if you won like a bronze medal in the Olympics in as a gymnast, you could probably end up on a Wheaties box. Now there would be no interest at all in you unless you had won multiple golds.
Yeah. Well, that's the last of the images, because I'm not going to go through the whole book. I don't want people to, although I guess, I hope that's enough images to get whet people's appetite. And I think one of the core things about the book is the fact, one of the core takeaways for me was the fact that people are so uneducated and get their news from social media. Everything's like, it could be fake news. If I agree with it, then it's news. It's news for me. Could you talk a little bit about that a little more?
Yeah, well, I mean, digital fakery, I'm just gonna move this a little bit, is definitely one of the major themes of The Stringer, and Mark Scribner uses that in order to drive forward the plot and his nefarious schemes. The thing is that I think my father, who was an aeronautical engineer, was right when he said that, technology is fundamentally neutral, right? I mean, like, you can use atomic energy to bomb Hiroshima. You can also use it to power a city. And I think that's true about internet anonymity, and it's true about things like deep fakes. I mean, like, deep fakes can be used to use video, you can take video archival footage of, say, let's say, the president, and stuff all sorts of words into his mouth, and you can make him say anything you want. That sounds obviously terrifying, but it's also can be used for AI to help people with dementia. It can be used to create sort of VR spaces that are made for cool video games, characters and stuff. So there's a lot of stuff that's positive about it, but just as equal negative. So the problem that we have now is that our gatekeepers are gone, right? I mean, we used to have Uncle Walter on the CBS Evening News, and we trusted Uncle Walter because he had earned our trust over decades, and we knew that he wouldn't lie to us, and that if he told us something that turned out not to be true, he would fess up, and then we would know what was right. We used to watch a tiny number of sources that were highly vetted. Now, obviously, they had their biases, and they had their institutional connections to government and their corruption and so on, but it felt safer. Now, news has been highly democratized, lower D democratized, and so anybody can create a news website. Anybody can post their own news thread. Anyone can become a source of news, but that person's never going to get that much access to any single slice of the market because it's split up so many different ways. And there's increasingly a desire for people to just, as you said yourself, just people want to sort of have their own pre-existing biases reinforced. They don't want to be questioned, and of course, it is really easy to make stuff up wholesale and get away with it. The QAnon stuff is an example of it's an extreme example, but even more nefarious is a sort of spin. Like, for example, like, they have said so many times that Russia interfered to a significant extent in the last 2 elections, to the extent where it's basically truth, but it's not true. There's not really any significant evidence, even according to the CIA, that any outcomes were changed or anything like that, or that it happened on any scale, or even that the government had anything to do with it. It was just a private troll farm. But the point is, it becomes truth, capital T, truth. And so the Stringer dwells a lot on those issues. It's first and foremost, it's a character study, and it's a sort of a plot that zigs and zags, but the themes are very important. It's talking about what we're losing when we lose sort of big J journalism, or with people who are paid professionals who have a lot to lose if they're ever caught out lying or spinning or dissembling. And that we don't have that. We don't, in this society, we don't have a common truth. I mean, I think about, like, in a country like France, they have vibrant political debate between left and right, but they don't really have debates about what's true. Like, the far right admits that climate change is a real thing. They just have a different take on whether anything should be done about it, and if so, what, than the left does. Here, we can't even agree on whether the Earth is 6,000 or 7 billion years old, or 13 billion years old, or whatever. We can't decide. We can't decide on evolution. We can't decide on, we can't decide on climate change. We can't agree on science. We can't agree on what COVID-19 means, whether diseases are real. I mean, it's crazy. And so without a common truth, we're hamstrung. We cannot move forward.
Well, I think of the size of the United States, that's a factor, I guess, that it's so big. We have different regions. We have different time zones.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's true. That is true. And but of course, other countries have had the same issue. I mean, China and Russia are not only bigger by size, but also their, the transportation and the communications aren't as good as ours are. I mean, it should be easier to unify the U.S. under to aggregate it under a common political culture, but it hasn't been. It's been very elusive.
I want to say one more thing about the stringer that would appeal to a mass audience. It definitely has the cinematic quality. I think of it as a fable for our times. Lots of action, lots of interesting, quirky twists and turns. And you had mentioned in a book talk that you really enjoyed Kill the Messenger with Jeremy Renner. I could see Jeremy Renner or someone like him play Mark Scribner.
He's great.
Jeremy Renner from 2014, but Jeremy Renner now he's too marvelized, and I guess just not, maybe beyond a lot of people's reach.
It's funny. I mean, I don't know if you read, Pablo really wanted Ben Affleck, which, I'd be awesome. I think Ben Affleck would be great at it.
Yeah.
And I always thought of Clooney because sort of his hard-boiled Three Kings up in the air persona.
Oh, exactly.
Yeah. But there's many others. I mean, any leading man, I think, could do this.
I could see the Coen brothers having fun creating their version of it.
Oh my God, that would be a different animal, but it would be one I'd want to watch.
Oh my. Well, I don't know what I could ask you about Biden without us going in a rabbit hole. For my taste, for my thinking, for my real politic thinking, I think it was a successful press conference in a lot of ways.
Mm.
What do you think?
Well, I mean, I think, I do think he's suffering from cognitive problems. He had a lot of recall issues. He had a hard time tracking the questions, and particularly the filibuster. The reporters I was kind of impressed by, they kept trying to bring him back to whether or not Democrats should try to get rid of the filibuster or not, because he just wouldn't focus on. He didn't seem to be able to answer the question, like after 5 attempts, and then it was almost like at one point he went off on this tangent about the parliamentarian. Well, the parliamentarian, that he's conflating that thing. That's something else. The parliamentarian doesn't decide whether the filibuster goes on or not. And so it was weird because this guy served in the Senate for so long. So I think there were moments where I was like, wow, he has good recall of statistics, much more impressive than I would have expected. He had some moments of humor, like when he talked about, immigrants coming to the US because he was quote unquote a nice guy as opposed to Trump. But overall, I think it's pretty clear that he's not fit to be president. I think he should resign and step, if he were responsible, and really step aside in favor of Vice President Harris. I mean, I really do. I just don't. He's just, he's too old. He's past his expiration date. He's not sharp enough. This is the president of the United States. We shouldn't be making excuses for him. There were 19 Democrats on that stage, any one of whom would have been more lucid, sharper, more energetic, and wouldn't have needed to refer to a briefing book during a press conference. I thought it was scary, but I think this is one of those things where everybody's going to look at Biden as like a Rorschach test, right? Like if you hated Trump that much, you're going to be like, oh my God, he's so great. And if you're like me and you just like don't see that much difference between them, then you're going to be like, oh my God, this guy is so senile. But he's not that senile. He's just a bit senile. He's starting.
Well, I admire your work so much that I do, when I say rabbit hole, I mean rabbit hole because we might be a little bit in disagreement. I don't think that he's unfit. And I think that he's a marvelous change, and we need it compared to Trump. Of course, compared to Trump is the key thing, but I think that I kind of suspect that if you saw some problems with him talking about the filibuster, it might have been just a way for him to avoid completely answering the question. Because this is before my time, but Eisenhower was famous for doing that. He would talk in a garbled way where you didn't really know what he said, but it was the president of the United States saying it must be okay. I'm not going to question him.
Well, you know, they say Eisenhower was kind of loopy the last 2 years right after his heart
Maybe that's a
attack.
bad example in a way.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. I mean, it's I don't think this was presidential or political deflection. You know, in basic media training, they always tell you answer the question that you wish you were asked, not the question that you were asked. And I don't think this was that. Hillary Clinton was great at doing that. You know, Obama was great at doing that. But I think this is more like he was having a hard time understanding and remembering what he was asked. And he sort of falls upon, like Trump did, Trump would fall on these verbal tics that you'd hear over and over, you know, like, you know, nobody's ever seen, you know, no one ever thought, but we did it. Nobody else ever did it. And with Biden, you sort of see the same patterns, right? Like, this is the deal. This is, you know, we're taking them one thing at a time, taking it as it comes. So I don't know. And that's like, it's over and over and over. And that's weird. Obama didn't do that. You know, he was, whatever Obama's faults were, he was sharp and still is. And you, by the way, it's not his age. But I mean, I've known people well into, I knew a woman who was 102 who was sharper than Joe Biden. So.
No, you're right. Joe Biden, a younger Joe Biden, actually might not be that impressive when you look back.
I looked though, and he was in the late 80s, early 90s. I mean, you know, he's not Disraeli, okay, but he's not Churchill. But you know, he was a sharp guy for sure. You know, he was in full command, and there's something about his face. He's got that. You know, I went through, my mother like succumbed to dementia and Alzheimer's. She died a year ago. And I watched that decline, and you know, the facial expressions that sort of like, you know, look, it like kind of, it seemed, I'm like, I think that's, I see it in Biden. I think, you know, and remember, we're talking about the president of the United States. You know, is he sharp enough to drive my Uber? But nuclear launch codes? You know, I mean, I think what's happening is he's just got like his advisors are, you know, doing most of the work.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I wasn't that impressed with the press in a lot of ways. There was a checklist of questions they could have asked, and they didn't really bother to ask too much about the Build Back Better plan, which, I mean, you could have really talked a lot about that.
Yeah, the press always sucks. I was actually impressed with them because I have, like you with Trump, I have a low bar with the press, and I didn't expect much. I was impressed that they followed up each other's questions, which they don't usually do, about the filibuster. I liked that. They used to do that to Nixon, and it was great. And I also liked Kirsten Welker from MSNBC. She kind of held the president's feet to the fire about the border crisis. Well, so when are you going to take care of this? It's like, well, I don't know. You know, like, okay, fine. You don't know, but, you know, get the guy on the record.
Yeah. I wanted to jump back to the Stringer. I was looking.
And just so you know, FYI, I'm expecting an interview call like any minute. So.
Oh, okay, well, I'll wrap it up.
I don't know if we need to, if you want to do another segment, or, you know, I could do this and then come back, or, you know, there it is.
Oh, okay. We can stop now. Thanks, Ted. And we can always pick it up.
I'm happy to.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Sorry. Hello.